Chapter 11. Take a risk. There's no other way to fail forward. Every era has its great explorers, people willing to face danger to break new ground and discover new worlds. The fuel that makes it possible for those people to conquer new territory is risk, as pioneer aviator Charles Lindbergh emphasized when he said, "What kind of man would live where there is no daring? I don't believe in taking foolish chances, but nothing can be accomplished if we don't take any chances at all." Risk is a funny thing. It's very subjective. Someone may have no trouble plunging off a high tower with a bungee cord attached to his leg, but that same person may look at speaking in front of a group of 20 people as a death-defying risk. To another person, speaking isn't intimidating at all. For example, I love to speak to groups. I've spoken to groups as large as 82,000 people, and it's wonderful. On the other hand, you couldn't get me to bungee jump. So how do you judge whether some activity is worth the risk? Do you base it on your fear? No, you should do some things that scare you. Should you base it on the probability of success? No, I don't think that's the answer either. Risk must be evaluated not by the fear it generates in you or the probability of your success, but by the value of the goal. Allow me to tell you the story of someone who pushed the envelope of risk in order to achieve goals that had great value to her. Her name was Amelia Earhart. She grew up in the Midwest and had a very ordinary childhood. While in her early 20s, she took her first plane ride at Doherty Field in Long Beach, California. She was hooked. She said, "As soon as we left the ground, I knew I myself had to fly." She immediately began working odd jobs to earn the $1,000 that would be required to take flying lessons, and it wasn't long before she was learning how to fly from Anita Snook, another pioneer flyer. Earhart found that learning to fly wasn't easy, or at least not for her, and she had more than her share of crashes, but she persevered. In 1921, Earhart made her first solo. The next year, she set the first of her many aviation records. She piloted planes because she loved to fly, but she also had an agenda. She was trying to break ground for others. She said, "My ambition is to have this wonderful gift produce practical results for the future of commercial flying and for the women who may want to fly tomorrow's planes." By 1935, Amelia Earhart was a seasoned world-class pilot and had done a lot of things to accomplish her goals of opening doors for women and legitimizing commercial aviation. She must have believed the motto of all great achievers: if at first you do succeed, try something harder, because that's when she decided to embark on her greatest adventure. She intended to fly around the world. Her first leg took her from Oakland to Hawaii, but as she took off from Luke Field near Pearl Harbor, she blew a tire and crashed the plane, causing tremendous damage. She had failed, but she wasn't ready to give up. Her plane was shipped to California for repairs, and she planned out her next attempt. 2 years later, in June of 1937, she again started on her around-the-world voyage, this time heading east. For a month, she and her navigator, Frederick Noonan, made their way. At the end of June, they had flown 22,000 miles. When they took off from New Guinea on July the 2nd, they had great hope because there were only 7,000 miles to go. But they were never seen again. If anyone had been able to talk to Earhart about her last hours, I believe she would have not expressed any regret for attempting what she did. To achieve any worthy goal, you must take risk. Amelia Earhart believed that, and her advice when it came to risk was simple and direct. Decide whether or not the goal is worth the risk involved. If it is, stop worrying. The reality is that everything in life is risky. If you want to avoid all risk, then, well, don't ride in an automobile. They cause 20% of all fatal accidents. Don't travel by air, rail, or water. 16% of all accidents result from these activities. Don't walk in the street. 15% of all accidents occur there, and, well, I guess you shouldn't stay at home. 17% of all the accidents happen there. You see, in life there are really no safe places or risk-free activities. Helen Keller, author, speaker, and advocate for the disabled, asserted, "Security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Everything in life brings risk. It's true that you risk failure if you try something bold because you might miss it. But you're also risking failure if you stand still and don't try anything new. As G.K. Chesterton said, "I do not believe in a fate that falls on men however they act, but I do believe in a fate that falls on them unless they act. The less you venture out, the greater your risk of failure." Ironically, the more you risk failure and actually fail, the greater your chances of success. If risk has such great potential rewards, then why aren't people embracing it as a friend? I believe they don't because they tend to fall into one or more of the following 6 traps. Number 1, the embarrassment trap. Deep down, nobody wants to look bad. And if you take a risk and fall flat on your face, you might embarrass yourself. But the only way to become better is to take steps forward, even shaky ones that cause you to fall down. Little progress is better than no progress at all. Success comes in taking many small steps. Number 2, the rationalization trap. People who get caught in the rationalization trap second-guess everything they do, and as they prepare to take action, they tell themselves it's really not that important. But the truth is, if you wait long enough, nothing is important. Sidney J. Harris says, "Regret for the things we did can be tempered by time. It is regret for the things we did not do that is inconsolable." Number 3, the unrealistic expectation trap. For some reason, many people think everything in life should be easy, and when they find out that achievement takes effort, they give up. But success takes hard work. There's a Latin proverb that says, "If there is no wind, row." As you prepare to take a risk, don't expect to get a favorable wind. Begin with a mindset that you have to row. Then, if you get some help, it will be a pleasant surprise. Number 4, the fairness trap. Psychologist M. Scott Peck begins his book, The Road Less Traveled, with the words, "Life's not fair. That's a fact." But many people never learn it. Instead of acknowledging it and moving on, they expend their energy trying to find fairness. They say to themselves, "I shouldn't have to be the one to do this." Number 5, the timing trap. Some people tend to think that there's a perfect time to do everything, and this isn't it. So they wait. But Jim Stovall advises, don't wait for all the lights to be green before you leave the house. If you wait for the perfect timing, you'll wait forever. Number 6, the inspiration trap. Someone once said, "You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great." Many people want to wait for inspiration before they are willing to step out and take a risk. I find that especially true of people with an artistic bent. But as playwright Oscar Wilde says, when he was asked the difference between a professional writer and an amateur, the difference is that an amateur writes when he feels like it, a professional writes regardless. As you examine the way you live, consider whether you are taking enough risk, not senseless ones, but intelligent ones. Even if you don't fall into one of the 6 traps I just shared, you still may be playing it too safe. How can you tell? By looking at your mistakes. If you are succeeding in everything you do, then you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. And that means you're not taking enough risks. Step number 11 in failing forward, if at first you do succeed, try something harder. Chapter 12. Make failure your best friend. The idea that you can make failure your best friend may seem very odd to you, but the truth of the matter is that failure is either your friend or your enemy, and you are the one who chooses which. If you play a dirge every time you fail, then failure will remain your enemy. But if you determine to learn from your failures, then you actually benefit from them, and that makes failure your friend. If you repeatedly use your failures as springboards to success, then failure can become your best friend, and here's what I mean. How would you feel about an incident in your life that cost you your nose, half your right arm, and all the fingers on your left hand? I'm guessing that you wouldn't look at it as positive. But that's what happened to Dr. Beck Weathers, and he sees that loss as the defining event in his life, the event that turned everything around for him. What event would cause a man to willingly embrace such a drastic disability? The answer can be found on Mount Everest. You see, Beck Weathers was one of the people on that peak during the now famous incident in 1996 when a blizzard suddenly came in and cost 12 people their lives. Weathers was 49 years old when he ascended Everest. At that point, he had been a mountain climber for 10 years, and it consumed him, so much that it took much time away from his family. For the Everest climb, Weathers signed on with an expedition led by New Zealander Rob Hall. Before the team got to the high camp at 26,000 feet, Weathers was doing fine. But as he ascended the peak on May 10th, Weathers realized that he was in trouble. As he went up the mountain, the altitude caused the lenses in his eyes to flatten out, and that made him blind. At the time, it seemed that the best decision would be for Weathers to wait where he was, then rejoin the crew as they came back down from the summit. While disappointing, it seemed to be the wisest choice. But it turned into a nightmare. A freak blizzard rapidly enveloped the mountain, dropping the temperature to about 50 degrees below zero and increasing winds to 70 miles per hour. Weathers got left behind on the mountain, and as hours passed, he lapsed into a hypothermic coma. Fellow climbers searched for Weathers for hours, and early in the morning on May 11th they actually found him. But he was covered with ice and barely breathing. They knew he would die, so they left him where he was and radioed to his wife that he was dead. No person has ever recovered out of a hypothermic coma and survived except Beck Weathers. Somehow he revived, got up, found his way, and staggered back into camp. His jacket was open. His face was black beyond recognition with frostbite, and his exposed right arm was marble white and frozen upright in front of him. Even after his miraculous return to camp, nobody thought Weathers would survive. But he kept pulling through. Back home in Dallas, he received medical attention. He underwent 10 surgeries where they amputated the fingers on his left hand, amputated his right arm near the elbow, and reconstructed a new nose using tissue from other parts of his body. Through it all, Weathers went through a radical learning process. He believes he traded his hands for something more valuable, lessons about himself, his values, and life. Beck Weathers' attitude reflects more than just gratitude for surviving a great tragedy that should have killed him. He displays a teachability that has allowed him to change his life for the better. He has failed forward by making hardship his best friend. Fortunately, you don't have to be left for dead on top of the world's highest mountain to become teachable and learn how to make failure your friend. You can do it from the safety of your own home. All it requires is the right attitude. Your attitude toward failure determines your altitude after failure. Some people never understand that. As Louis Armstrong once quipped, there are some people that if they don't know, you can't tell them. Teachability is a mindset that says no matter how much I know or think I know, I can learn from this situation. That kind of thinking can help you turn adversity into advantage. Anyone can make failure a friend by maintaining a teachable attitude and using a strategy for learning from failure. To turn losses into profits, I recommend that you ask the following questions every time you face adversity. Question number 1. What caused the failure? The situation, someone else, or myself? Where did things break down? Were you in a no-win situation? Did another person create the problem? Did you make a mistake? When Beck Weathers looked at his Mount Everest experience after the fact, he determined that he had made mistakes which led to his failure. Always begin the learning process by trying to identify the cause of a problem. Question number 2. Was what happened truly a failure, or did I just fall short? What we think is our fault may have really been an attempt to fulfill unrealistic expectations. It doesn't matter whether we place them on ourselves or someone else does. If a goal is unrealistic and we miss it, that is not a failure. Question number 3. What successes are contained in the failure? There's an old saying that states, "The gem cannot be polished without friction, nor man perfected without trials." No matter what kind of failure you experience, there is always a potential jewel of success contained in it. Sometimes it may be difficult to find, but you can discover it if you are willing to look for it. Question number 4. What can I learn from what happened? I enjoy reading the comic strip Peanuts by Charles Schulz. One of my favorites has Charlie Brown at the beach building a beautiful sandcastle. As he stands back to admire his work, it is suddenly consumed by a huge wave. Looking at the smooth sand mound that has been his creation a moment before, he says, "There must be a lesson here, but I don't know what it is." That's the way many people approach adversity. They are so consumed by the events they experience that they become bewildered and miss the whole learning experience. But there is always a way to learn from failures and mistakes. Poet Lord Byron was right when he stated, "Adversity is the first path to truth." Question number 5. Am I grateful for the experience? One of the ways to maintain a teachable mindset is to cultivate an attitude of gratitude, and that's possible even in the face of great disappointment. For example, American sprinter Eddie Hart missed a preliminary heat for the 100-meter sprint in the 1972 Olympics in Munich. As a result, he lost his chance to win an individual gold medal. But he said it made him all the more grateful for the medal he received as a member of the relay team, and for the lesson it taught him about living with defeats. As you come away from failure, try to cultivate a similar sense of gratitude. Question number 6. How can I turn this into a success? Author William Marston says, "If there is any single factor that makes for success in living, it is the ability to draw dividends from defeat. Every success I know has been reached because the person was able to analyze defeat and actually profit from it in the next undertaking." Determining what went wrong in a situation has value, but taking that analysis another step and figuring out how to use it to your benefit is the real difference maker when it comes to failing forward. Question number 7. Who can help me with this issue? People say there are 2 kinds of learning: experience, which is gained from your own mistakes, and wisdom, which is learned from the mistakes of others. I recommend that you learn from the mistakes of others as much as possible. After all, you will never live long enough to make them all yourself. Seek advice, but make sure it's from someone who has successfully handled his or her failures. Question number 8. Where do I go from here? Once all the thinking is done, you've got to figure out what to do next. In their book, Everyone's a Coach, Don Shula and Kim Blanchard state, learning is defined as a change in behavior. You haven't learned a thing until you take action and use it. When you're able to learn from any bad experience and thereby turn it into a good experience, you make a major transition in life. For years, I've taught something that I think gives great insight on the subject of change. It says this: people change when they hurt enough that they have to, learn enough that they want to, and receive enough that they are able to. I learned the truth of that statement on a whole new level on December 18, 1998. While at my company's Christmas party, I felt an excruciating pain in my chest, and I suffered a serious heart attack. I honestly thought I wasn't going to make it that night. Although my heart attack was a painful and surprising experience, I feel that God was very good to me in that process. Several excellent physicians rallied around me and made it possible not only for me to survive, but to avoid any permanent heart damage. And I've learned a lot from it. For example, when it comes to telling the important people in your life how much you love them, you can never do it often enough. I believe my work on earth is not yet finished, and God has spared me so that I can complete it. I've learned that I must change my living habits for the sake of my health, the quality of my life, and the impact I desire to make in the future. My cardiologist, Dr. Marshall, told me that men who survive an early heart attack and learn from it live longer and healthier lives than those who never suffer a heart attack, and I have determined to learn from the experience. I've changed my diet. I'm also exercising every day, and I'm striving to live a more balanced life. But you don't need to suffer a heart attack or be caught in a blizzard on Mount Everest to make failure your best friend. In fact, I don't recommend it. All you have to do is maintain a teachable heart and be eager to learn every time you fail. Step number 12 in failing forward: learn from a bad experience and make it a good experience. Chapter 13, Avoid the Top 10 Reasons People Fail. I don't put much stock in the idea of luck. I think that normally things go well or poorly for people based on their actions. I believe that for the most part you create your own luck by working hard, practicing self-discipline, remaining persistent, and making personal growth a daily priority. Add to that the blessings of a loving God, and you don't need to think about luck. However, a few years ago I came across an article printed in the Los Angeles Times that almost made me change my mind about luck. Listen to what it said. Jolted, jilted, hammered in a car crash and robbed, Lawrence Hanratty was named Friday as the unluckiest man in New York. Nearly electrocuted in a construction site accident in 1984 that put him in a coma for weeks, Hanratty lost the lawyers fighting for his disability claim. One was disbarred, two died, and his wife ran off with her lawyer. Hanratty, who was spent years fighting heart and liver disease, had his car wrecked in a crash last year, and when police left the scene of the accident, he was held up and robbed. As if he hasn't tolerated enough hardship, 38-year-old Hanratty of Mount Vernon, New York, said an insurance company now wants to cut off his workers' compensation benefits, and his landlord has threatened to kick him out of his apartment. Depressed and suffering from agoraphobia, a fear of open spaces, Hanratty uses a canister of oxygen and takes 42 pills a day for his heart and liver ailments. Hearing that story kind of makes you want to find poor Lawrence to see if you can help him out in some way, doesn't it? But I think the experiences of Lawrence Hanratty are not typical of most people who continually fail or experience continual ongoing adversity. Why? Because most of the time the trouble we face is the result of our own negative actions. It's usually our own fault. Many people possess blind spots when it comes to knowing about themselves. Sometimes those blind spots apply to strengths, but more often people fail to see their own weaknesses, and that causes trouble. If you don't know you have a problem, then you can't work to fix it. I'd like to acquaint you with what I have observed to be the top 10 reasons people fail. As you listen, be open-minded and try to see yourself and your shortcomings in the descriptions that I give. Look for reoccurring issues in your life. As you do, you may find your Achilles heel. Number 1, poor people skills. By far the greatest single obstacle to success that I see in others is a poor understanding of people. A while back, the Wall Street Journal printed an article on the top reasons that executives fail. At the top of the list was a person's inability to effectively relate to others. How are you when it comes to working with people? Are you genuine and authentic? Or do you continually put up a front? Do you listen carefully to others, or do you spend most of your time doing the talking when you're with people? Do you expect everyone else to conform to your wishes, your schedule, and your agenda? Or do you look for ways to meet people on their terms? If you haven't learned how to get along with people, you will always be fighting a battle to succeed. However, if you can make people skills a strength, it will take you farther than any other skill you develop. Number 2, a negative attitude. How you react to circumstances of your life has everything to do with your well-being and your success. W. Clement Stone tells a story about a young bride who traveled with her husband to the California desert during World War II. Because she had grown up in the East, the desert seemed remote and desolate to her. The only housing they could find was a shack near a village of Native Americans, none of whom spoke English. She spent a lot of time there alone, waiting out the sweltering heat each day. When her husband was gone for a long period, she wrote her mother to say that she was returning home. A few days later, she received a reply that said, "Two men looked from prison bars. One saw mud, the other stars." Those words helped the young woman to see things more clearly. She made friends with her Native American neighbors. She began working with them on weaving and pottery, and she took time to explore the desert and discover its natural beauty. All of a sudden, she was living in a new world, and the only thing that had changed was her attitude. If your circumstances constantly get you down, then maybe it's time for a change, not of your situation, but in your attitude. Number 3, a bad fit. Though we should always first examine our attitudes when we don't enjoy our circumstances, Sometimes a change in situation also is in order. Sometimes a case of mismatched abilities, interests, personality, or values can be a major contributor to chronic failure. Few things in life are more frustrating than being stuck in a profession or organization that doesn't suit you. Evaluate yourself and your situation. If there is a poor fit, think about making a change. Number 4, lack of focus. Bad things happen when a person doesn't focus. Anybody can make an honest mistake when things get hectic, but people lacking focus have trouble not because they're too busy, but because their priorities are out of whack, and that wastes their time and resources. If you find yourself going from task to task without making any progress, or you can't seem to reach a goal no matter how much effort you give it, examine your focus. No one can move forward without it. Number 5, weak commitment. For a long time it seemed that apathy was chic, but effort and commitment seemed to be coming back into style. And that's a good thing, because without commitment you cannot accomplish anything of value. The last time you failed, did you stop trying because you failed, or did you fail because you stopped trying? What was your level of commitment? If you're committed, then when you fail, it doesn't mean that you'll never succeed. It just means that it will take you longer. Commitment makes you capable of failing forward until you reach your goals. Number 6, unwillingness to change. Perhaps the greatest enemy to achievement, personal growth, and success is inflexibility. Some people seem to be so in love with the past that they can't deal with the present. You don't have to love change in order to be successful, but you do need to be willing to accept it. Change is the great catalyst for personal growth. It gets you out of a rut, it gives you a fresh start, and it affords you an opportunity to reevaluate your direction. If you resist change, you're really resisting success. Learn flexibility, or learn to like living with your failures. Number 7, a shortcut mindset. One of the most common obstacles to success is the desire to cut corners and take the short road to success. But shortcuts never pay off in the long run. As Napoleon said, victory belongs to the most persevering. Most people tend to underestimate the time it takes to achieve something of value, but to be successful, you have to be willing to pay your dues. James Watt spent 20 years laboring to perfect his steam engine. William Harvey labored night and day for 8 years to prove how blood circulated in the human body, and it took another 25 years for the medical profession to acknowledge that he was right. Cutting corners is really a sign of impatience and poor self-discipline. If you are willing to follow through, you can achieve a breakthrough. That's why Albert Gray says, "The common denominator of success lies in forming the habit of doing things that failures don't like to do." Number 8, relying on talent alone. Talent is overrated, not because it doesn't have value, but because talent alone isn't enough to take a person through the multiple failures that life brings. Adding a strong work ethic to talent is like pouring gasoline on a fire. It's explosive. But the greater your talent, the more likely you are to lean heavily on it and skip the hard day-to-day work of improving it. If you possess this negative tendency, put yourself on a growth plan so that you can make the most of whatever God-given talent you have. Number 9, acting on poor information. One of the things that successful executives have in common is the ability to make weighty decisions based on limited amounts of information. But they also have in common the ability to gather reliable information to use as they evaluate things. General Douglas MacArthur knew this. He asserted, "Expect only 5% of an intelligence report to be accurate. The trick of a good commander is to isolate the 5%. Number 10, not having any goals. Don Marquis says, "Ours is a world where people don't know what they want and are willing to go through hell to get it." Many people don't have goals because they haven't allowed themselves to dream. As a result, they don't possess a desire. If that describes you, then you've got to look deep within yourself and try to determine why you're on this planet. Once you've discovered that, you'll know what to shoot for. If you can discover the weakness that weakens you, then you can start doing something about it, and that can change your life. I've seen that happen over and over again in people who desire success. Let me tell you about one of them. One of the people I rely on most at the Enjoy Group is my good friend Dan Ryland. He and I have worked together for 16 years. He is highly organized, and he goes after a goal with a vengeance. But when I first met him, let's just say that because he was purpose-driven, he was not the most relational guy in the world. When Dan started working with me, he was an intern. I remember one day at the office, soon after he started working at the church, I was standing in the lobby having a conversation with a group of people, and Dan came in from a parking lot with his carefully arranged briefcase. He walked right through the group of us and didn't say a word. I excused myself from the group, and I followed him. Dan set his briefcase down on his desk, and when he turned around, he was surprised to see that I was standing there. I asked him why he had walked by the group of us without saying a word. He replied that he had lots of work to do. Then I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You just passed your work." Over the next few years, Dan and I worked together on his relationships with people. Today, if you were to meet Dan, you would think that his ability to work with people is a natural strength because he is so good at it. And if I have a tricky assignment that requires someone with exceptional people skills to carry it out, do you know who my first choice is? Dan. And that has become possible because of his willingness to grow and change. He has taken a weakness and turned it into a strength. If you are dedicated to overcoming failure and achieving lasting success, then you need to be willing to do the same. Work on that weakness that weakens you, and there is no telling how far you will go. Step number 13 to failing forward: work on the weakness that weakens you. Chapter 14. The little difference between failure and success makes a big difference. Most unsuccessful people believe that a huge gaping chasm stands between them and success. They suspect deep down that they will never be able to cross that void and get to the other side in achieving their dreams. But I want to let you in on a little secret. There's not much difference between failure and success, and the little difference there is makes a big difference. What creates that difference? Let me share a story with you, and you will be able to guess what the difference maker is. I think everybody in the United States has heard of Macy's department store, thanks to their famous Thanksgiving Day parade and the movie Miracle on 34th Street. But fewer people know about the man who founded the store in 1858. His name was R.H. Macy. The son of a sea captain, Macy was born in Nantucket at a time when whaling was keen. In his early years, he worked several odd jobs, including a 4-year stint on a whaling ship and 6 months as a printer's apprentice. But his ambitions were higher. That's when he decided to try his hand at retail trade. With the money he saved from his time at sea, he opened a small thread and needle store in Boston. His hopes were high and his work ethic was strong, but the business failed within a year. For the next several years, Macy tried various endeavors, but all of them eventually ended in failure. For example, he opened 2 more retail stores in Boston, but failed to make a profit each time. He traveled to California in the gold rush, but failed to strike it rich. He sold supplies to the miners of the gold rush, but when the gold ran out, so did his business. Twice more he opened up dry goods stores in Boston, but twice he struggled to keep up with the competition, and eventually he declared bankruptcy. He worked as a stockbroker, but only achieved minimal success in the difficult economy. He tried real estate, but again had little success. Finally, following a real estate investment disaster, a friend convinced Macy to return to the retail trade. This time he decided to try his luck in Manhattan, and that was to make a tremendous difference. In 1858, R.H. Macy opened a fancy dry goods store. After only 12 months, he was grossing $80,000 a year. By the 1870s, the store averaged over $1 million in sales per year. In 1877, Macy died while on a buying trip in Europe. However, his business lived on, and it continued to bring innovation to retail trade. Today, the company continues to serve customers with 191 Macy's stores. Those stores exist because of one man who simply refused to give up. As you have no doubt guessed, the quality that took Macy through failure after failure after failure was his persistence. That is the little difference that makes a big difference when it comes to failing forward. It separates those who achieve success from those who only dream about it. Nothing worth achieving comes easily. The only way to fail forward and achieve your dreams is to cultivate tenacity and persistence. But to begin cultivating those qualities, you need a strategy. And that's what I want to share with you now, a 4-point plan for approaching achievement that will encourage stamina and resilience in the face of failures. Number 1, find a purpose. More than anything else, what keeps a person going in the midst of adversity is having a sense of purpose. It is the fuel that powers persistence. If you are a purpose-driven person naturally, then you probably already possess an innate sense of direction that helps you to overcome adversity. But if you're not, then you need some help. Use the following simple steps to help you develop a desire. Letter A, get next to people who possess great desire. B, develop discontent with the status quo. C, search for a goal that excites you. Letter D, put your most vital possessions into that goal. And finally, letter E, visualize yourself enjoying the rewards of that goal. Number 2, eliminate excuses. Agriculture scientist George Washington Carver noted, 99% of failures come from people who have the habit of making excuses. Having desire alone will not get you through your failures. You have to forget about making excuses and keep moving forward, as R.H. Macy did. No matter how many opportunities you've missed or mistakes you've made, don't ever make excuses. Bite the bullet. Take complete responsibility for yourself and keep trying. Number 3, develop incentives. Nothing helps a person remain tenacious like a good incentive. That's why so many companies use them with their employees. Walter Elliott said, perseverance is not a long race, it is many short races, one after another. If you give yourself worthwhile incentives to win the short races, attaining a long-term goal seems less formidable. Number 4, cultivate determination. Author Napoleon Hill noted, effort only fully releases its reward after a person refuses to quit. To develop persistence over the long haul, you have to cultivate inward determination on a continual basis. And if you do, someday your story may be similar to Admiral Peary, who attempted to reach the North Pole 7 times before he made it on try number 8, or Oscar Hammerstein, who had 5 flop shows that lasted less than a total of 6 weeks before Oklahoma, which ran for 269 weeks and grossed $7 million. Or John Creasy, who received 743 rejection slips from the publishers before 1 word was ever published. He eventually published 560 books, which have sold over 60 million copies. Or Eddie Arcaro, who lost 250 consecutive races before he won his first. Learn to become a determined individual. Inspire yourself with stories of people who tried, failed, and kept going. And remember, the only difference between a little shot and a big shot is that the big shot kept on shooting. When it comes to persistence, one of the most remarkable people I've ever known is Orville Redenbacher, the popcorn king. Redenbacher was born on a farm in Jackson Township, a few miles south of Brazil, Indiana, in 1907. At age 12, he started growing popcorn in addition to his numerous chores. In time, his additional crop brought in $150 a month, most of which was set aside for his college. In 1924, he graduated from high school, the first person in his family to do so. He received an appointment to West Point, but instead he went to Purdue. His ambition was to become a county agent. Times were tough, and coming from a farming family meant that he didn't have much money. So Redenbacher worked hard and did lots of odd jobs for the university in the agricultural department, including some experiments with popcorn hybrids. In 1928, he received his degree in agriculture. After graduation, the first job he took was that of a teacher. Then a year later, he changed professions and became a county agent, a job he held until 1940, all the while continuing his experiments with popcorn hybrids. For the next 10 years, Redenbacher managed 12,000 acres of farms for the Princeton Mining Company and continued his experiments. Then in 1950, he and a friend decided to go into business together, and they purchased a seed company. That freed up more time for Redenbacher to develop his hybrid, but it was a huge undertaking. To give you an idea of the magnitude of the task, listen to the words of his grandson, Gary Redenbacher. Grandpa was a tireless worker. Those who have ever tried to hybridize a rose or any other plant know that it's just a matter of dogged determination and time. I tell people to imagine that they are in a football stadium full of fans. Imagine that each fan is a stalk of corn. Your job is to go to each corn stalk in the stands and individually pollinate each one. But since the average football stadium only holds 50,000 people, you'll need to do 3 stadiums before you've pollinated as many corn stalks as Grandpa did each year. Through all the tens of thousands of hybrids, Grandpa never lost sight of his goal, to produce a better popcorn. Finally, in 1965, Redenbacher perfected his popcorn hybrid. He had a popcorn that outperformed every other variety in popping volume, poppability, and flavor. But it took him another 10 years to make his popcorn the best-selling brand in the world. It would have been easy for Redenbacher to quit his quest for the perfect popcorn many times. He wasn't successful, marketing it until he was 67 years old. But he had a dream and the determination to pursue it, and he wouldn't give up. When asked about his philosophy, he said, "I followed the classic homespun principles. Never say die, never be satisfied, be stubborn, be persistent. Integrity is a must. Anything worth having is worth striving for with all your might. If you desire to succeed, realize that there is not much difference between success and failure. If you are willing to be doggedly persistent, you can be a success." Step number 14 in failing forward. Understand there's not much difference between failure and success. Chapter 15. It's what you do after you get back up that counts. Although persistence is important, it isn't the only key to success. I think you need persistence plus something more. It's just like the old saying about boxers, that a champion gets up one more time than he gets knocked down. While that may be true, if that's the only thing he does, he may finally win, but not before getting his brains beat out. Who wants that? He's much better off if he needs to get up off of the mat only a few times. He does that by figuring out how to knock out his opponent. That's what Milton Bradley did, in a manner of speaking. He figured out what to do so that he wouldn't continue falling down. He started out his career at age 20 as a draftsman. That was in 1856. By 1860, he had earned enough money to buy a printing press and go into business for himself as a lithographer. His first great product idea was to lithograph the newly elected President Abraham Lincoln. As soon as he offered the print for sale, the orders started flooding in. And he would have kept making money except for one problem. His print was of a clean-shaven Lincoln, but the new president had grown a beard. It nearly ruined Bradley. While he was trying to cope with his first major setback, he decided to try selling something different, a game. He had a concept for a game he called the checkered game of life, which taught moral values. He designed the game himself and printed up copies, and the game sold well. In fact, that first year he sold 40,000 copies. That first success gave him a new direction in life. He turned his attention to producing games and other materials that instructed people while entertaining them. Primarily, that meant games. But it wasn't long before he wanted to expand more intentionally into educational resources. A new concept to America had come across the Atlantic Ocean from Germany called kindergarten, and Bradley became very excited by it. Bradley saw the great educational potential of kindergarten for children and the potential market for materials to teach them. In time, Bradley became one of kindergarten's chief proponents. He produced numerous materials and even published the influential journal, Kindergarten Review. He made a difference in the lives of thousands upon thousands of children. Maybe you're someone who has developed the persistence and resilience to keep getting up when you get knocked down. But you're getting weary of dragging yourself back onto your feet again and again without making any progress. You may be physically and emotionally exhausted. If so, it's because you need to do more than just get back up. What you need is a plan. that will help you determine what to do after you've gotten back up. Try using these 7 simple steps based on the acronym FORWARD. The letter F stands for finalize your goal. In the last chapter, I wrote about the importance of having purpose in developing a desire. The next step is to settle on a definite goal you may want to reach. The boxer in the ring who gets back up has as his goal knocking out his opponent. Milton Bradley had his, to produce educational products for kindergarten students. You need to determine what your goal is. Recognize that the goal shapes the plan shapes the action. The action achieves the results bring success. The letter O stands for order your plans. The saying is old, but it's true. By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. There is no guarantee that what you plan will be carried out in the way that you envision it. But if you neglect to plan, your chances of success are very slim. The letter R stands for risk failing by taking action. Planning alone won't bring success. The other half of the battle is taking action. Conrad Hilton said, "Success seems to be connected with action. Successful people keep moving." Moving forward on a plan and actually doing it always involves risk. And that's good, because nothing of value is achieved without risk. The letter W stands for welcome mistakes. By now you realize that mistakes are not to be avoided but embraced. They are signals that you're moving into new territory, breaking new ground, making progress. As the old English proverb states, he who makes no mistakes never makes anything. The letter A stands for advance based on your character. Every time you face mistakes, an attempt to move forward in spite of them is a test of character. That's because there always comes a time when giving up is easier than standing up, when giving in looks more attractive than digging in. And in those moments, character may be the only thing you have to draw on to keep you going. After you've been knocked down, and you've had the will to get back up, the intelligence to plan your comeback, and the courage to take action, know that you will experience a defining moment, and it will define you, as an achiever or as someone who quit. The letter R stands for reevaluate your progress continually. The value of fighting through the difficult times and overcoming mistakes is that you have the opportunity to learn and adjust. Katie Payne, CEO of the Delahaye Group, says, "Business culture teaches us never to admit our mistakes, but to bury them instead, or to blame somebody else. And most personal and project reviews don't really do much to uncover mistakes. If we wait until we've finished a project to conduct a post-mortem, people will forget the mistake, or they'll build up a grudge against the coworker. Either way, we lose a learning opportunity." The letter D stands for develop new strategies to succeed. Lester Thurlow said, "A competitive world has 2 possibilities for you. You can lose, or, if you want to win, you can change. Once you develop a plan and put it into action, you're not done. In fact, if you want to succeed, you're never done. Success is in the journey, the continual process. And no matter how hard you work, you will not create the perfect plan nor execute it without error. You will never get to the point where you no longer make mistakes, but that's okay. Failures are milestones on the success journey. Each time you plan, risk, fail, reevaluate, and adjust, it gives you another opportunity to begin again, only better than the last time. As 67-year-old Thomas Edison said after he watched his laboratory burn to the ground, "Thank goodness all our mistakes were burned up. Now we can start again fresh." Starting over usually isn't easy, to say the least, but it sure can bring incredible results. I was reminded of that on a trip I took to Asia in the fall of 1999. My favorite stop on that trip was in Singapore. It's incredible. It's the most modern country in the world. Our tour guide, Susanna Fu, told us that Singapore was part of the British Empire for more than a century. After World War II, as the British granted independence to more and more members of their former empire, the people of Singapore began to think about their own independence, but the British were skeptical. Singapore had no natural resources and no experience in government. In 1959, when Singapore was granted its independence, the country didn't do well. That's when they decided that their best hope was to attach themselves to Malaysia, which they did in 1963. But the Malaysians didn't get along well with the people of Singapore, and after 2 years, Malaysia severed ties with them. The country's leader, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, felt that the country had been cast adrift, with few prospects and little hope. There was only one thing to do: work themselves out of the horrible situation that they were in. Yew wrestled with the problems until he had a plan. Number 1, bring in industry. His first objective was to bring in industries that would employ many low-skilled workers so that the people would have jobs. 2, create public housing. He wanted the people's quality of living to improve and to inspire them. They would move into better housing, but they would pay for it themselves. Number 3, send people to school. The only way for the country to improve was for the people to improve themselves. He would make education affordable for everyone. Number 4, set up a banking system. The goal was nothing short of making Singapore the financial center of Asia. Number 5, encourage international travel. Singapore would become a business and tourist destination with a world-class airport. Prime Minister Yew's goal was lofty and his plan was ambitious, but the people of Singapore persevered. First, they received hundreds of millions of dollars in loans from the World Bank and the countries of England and Japan. Next, they started bringing in experts from around the world to help them, carefully selecting representatives from countries who led their fields. From Japan and Germany, technical advisors to set up factories. From Sweden and Holland, experts on banking and financing. From Israel, Army advisors. From New Zealand and Australia, Air Force and naval advisors. Then they brought in 1,200 companies from the United States and Japan, including General Electric, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, Philips, Sony, Mitsubishi, Caterpillar, Texas Instruments, Mobil Oil, and others. As our guide Susanna Fu told us the story, she fought back the tears. She had been one of the struggling, uneducated people that the country had helped to make a better life. As a teenager in the 1960s, she had dropped out of high school. But as the country got on track, so did she. She went back to night school and improved herself. Today, now in her 50s, she understands the incredible distance she and her country have traveled. She has seen Singapore City go from a land of swamp and scrub to a great international city, and she has seen the people go from ignorant and helpless to a rugged, disciplined group of achievers. I'm not sure when I will get back to Singapore, but as I left, I realized that I would not forget Susanna Fu or her beautiful city. In all the countries and cities I've ever been, no place better exemplified what it means to fail forward. Step number 15 in failing forward: get up, get over it, and get going. Chapter 16. Now you're ready to fail forward. Well, now you know what it takes to fail forward. I believe wholeheartedly in what I've shared with you. Let's review all 15 steps to failing forward. Number 1. Realize there's one major difference between average people and achieving people. Number 2. Learn a new definition of failure. Number 3. Remove the you from failure. Number 4. Take action and reduce your fear. Number 5. Change your response to failure by accepting responsibility. Number 6. Don't let failure from outside get inside of you. Number 7. Say goodbye to yesterday. Number 8. Change yourself and your world changes. Number 9. Get over yourself and start giving yourself. Number 10. Find the benefit in every bad experience. Number 11. If at first you do succeed, try something harder. Number 12. Learn from a bad experience and make it a good experience. Number 13. Work on the weakness that weakens you. Number 14. Understand there's not much difference between failure and success. And number 15. Get up, get over it, and get going. Those are the steps. But I have to say that they may not really hit home with you until you see them in the life of somebody you consider to be a lot like you. Let me tell you about a friend of mine named Dave Anderson. Dave is an entrepreneur that I met at a leadership conference that I recently taught in Kenosha, Wisconsin. When you hear a little bit about him, you may think that everything he touches turns to gold. Dave's net value, $30 million. Education, master's degree from Harvard University. His current position, the chairman of Famous Daves of America, a company with 3,000-plus employees and annual sales of $41.6 million. Some career highlights? He founded Famous Daves of America and took the company public. He co-founded the Rainforest Cafe and took it public. He was named Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young. He was the director and executive vice president of an organization judged the fastest-growing company in America by Fortune magazine. He has helped create over 18,000 jobs so far in his career through his vision, leadership, and ability to see opportunity. That's an impressive profile, but to really understand and appreciate Dave's achievements, you need to know more about his failures. You see, Dave has lived out every one of the steps to failing forward, and I want to finish this tape with his story. And along the way, I'll tell you how the steps to failing forward fit into his life. David's first experience with a major failure came in college. During the break after his first term, a friend from home recruited him to begin selling oil conditioner for automotive engines. Dave caught the vision, and with his father's $2,500 investment, he went right to work. But despite his tireless efforts, he couldn't sell a thing. Yet contained within that first big failure were seeds of his future success. Remember step number 15? Get up, get over it, and get going. First, Dave believed that he could be successful. Now, that's step number 6. Don't let failure from outside get inside of you. Second, when his dad bought his product for him, Dave received a 5-day leadership course that he says changed his life. Remember step number 10? Find the benefit in every bad experience. Every night for months, Dave went to sleep listening to those tapes. Step number 8. Change yourself and your world changes. The dream within him wasn't dead, and he wasn't going to let failure get him down. Step number 1. Realize there is one major difference between average people and achieving people. It was in 1972 that Dave got the idea for another business. Though the oil additive opportunity didn't work for him, it encouraged him to start thinking like an entrepreneur. Step number 2. Learn a new definition of failure. His idea was to create and sell miniature dish gardens. He scraped together a few dollars and bought the materials to make up a few samples. Then he went out and talked to retailers, trying to get them to buy them. For the next 7 years, he operated out of his basement and worked like a madman. He put in long hours, 7 days a week. When his retail florist customers experienced their heavy crunch times, such as around Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, he would go into their shop, sweep up, clean out coolers, and do other chores for them to help them out. By age 21, he had accounts with every major retail florist in the city of Chicago. But there were more hard times to come. If you're from the Midwest, you probably remember the winter of 1979. It was one of the worst on record. The snowstorm that hit Chicago was horrible, and the drifts were so high that many side streets were closed for months. A lot of businesses went under that year, including Dave's. Florists didn't buy much in the middle of the blizzard. Many of Dave's customers not only weren't buying from him, but weren't paying him for the money they owed for orders that they had already received, and he had to file for bankruptcy. After Dave lost his business, he knew he needed to find work to support himself. Remember step number 5? Change your response to failure by accepting responsibility. He landed a job working for the American Can Company, selling Dixie cups, Marathon paper towels, and tissue to restaurants. To get his foot in the door, he took their worst territory. Step number 4. Take action and reduce your fear. He put to work the same principles and tenacity that he had in the wholesale floral industry. Step number 14. Understand there's not much difference between failure and success. He made a lot of mistakes, experienced much rejection, and lost many sales. But he worked like crazy and kept learning. Step number 13. Work on the weakness that weakens you. In 6 months, he took a territory that had been in last place and made it number 1 in the company. He regained momentum. Step number 7. Say goodbye to yesterday. He also discovered that his past failure didn't brand him for life. Step number 3. Remove the you from failure. Dave Anderson is a Native American. In 1982, Dave's tribe came calling. Their organization was losing money, and recognizing his business prowess, they asked him to be their CEO. Step number 11. If at first you do succeed, try something harder. He led the tribe's concerns for 3 years. During that time, gross revenue increased from $3.9 million to over $8 million. He also was honored by various state and local government and business organizations, and asked to sit on numerous councils for areas such as tourism and minority business development. In time, Dave was helping so many people that he was granted a Bush Leadership Fellowship for a lifetime of outstanding achievement by the Bush Foundation in St. Paul, Minnesota. Although Dave had achieved success in a variety of businesses over a relatively short period of time, he had not yet done anything related to his true passion, food. In 1994, Dave helped co-found a highly successful restaurant company called the Rainforest Cafe, and it made him wealthy. Step number 11. If at first you do succeed, try something harder. He used some of the money he made to purchase a small resort in Hayward, Wisconsin. There Dave built the kind of restaurant he'd always dreamed of having, one that made great barbecue. It was called Famous Dave's. Soon he opened a second Famous Dave's, then other restaurants. At this point, if you didn't know better, you'd think Dave was set. But Dave was on the verge of facing the lowest point of his life and his greatest obstacle, himself. In 1995, a group of friends and family came to him in what's commonly called an intervention. In other words, they confronted him about his drinking. When the people who loved him called him on the carpet, he was secretly pleased because he knew he needed to change. So he went into treatment for alcoholism. He's been sober ever since. Dave knew he needed to change, and in the years since he turned his life around, he has seen lots of change in himself. Now continual learning and growth are the hallmarks of his life. Step number 12. Learn from a bad experience and make it a good experience. As I share this with you, Dave owns 24 restaurants in 5 states, and the business is still growing. But as incredible as Dave's achievement has been, what's even more remarkable is his realization that his success does not exist for himself alone, but so that he can help others. Step number 9. Get over yourself and start giving yourself. He's doing that through an endowment fund for disadvantaged minority children, which he founded. Dave Anderson has made more mistakes, suffered more adversity, overcome more problems, and experienced more failures than most people you will ever meet. But he's also achieved more, too. And as my friend Zig Ziglar says, Dave Anderson is just getting started. The next time you look at successful people and find yourself envying what they have achieved, recognize that they have probably gone through a lot of negative experiences that you cannot see on the surface. There's an old joke that says, never ask what's in a hot dog while you're eating one. The idea is that if you did know what's in it, you'd never want to eat one again. A lot of failure goes into success. If you really want to achieve your dreams, I mean really achieve them, not just daydream or talk about them, you've got to get out there and fail. Fail early, fail often, but always fail forward. Turn your mistakes into stepping stones for success. And now that you know how to fail forward, you won't have to give up either. I wish you well. Keep dreaming. And my friend, keep failing forward.